Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about disgraced NBA players, and specifically the topic of domestic violence, which has always been an issue in the NBA. And the aspect of this issue that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how one team will sign a player who's been cut by another team for, let's just use the catch-all, misbehavior, as if one team's code of ethics is stronger or less lenient than another. Usually the team that signs the misbehaving player does so under the guise of, we're going to rehabilitate him, which is a pretty smart way to spin the fact that you're going to sign a player who's done some pretty deplorable acts because he's cheap and he still has some talent. This happens mostly in the NFL, but it does happen in the NBA a lot. So to start, let's go into the less egregious forms of misbehavior. Let's talk about Ime Udoka. In September 2022, Ime Udoka was suspended from his position as head coach of the Boston Celtics. Reason being, he violated the policy that the Boston Celtics had, and he had a relationship or an affair with one of the female staff members. He was married, she was married. I'm gonna pause right here and say we don't have a lot of information on this story, and there's a reason for that. It's incredibly obvious to me what happened here. Ime Udoka, who has very high status in the organization, possibly the highest status as head coach, had an affair with a female staff member of lower status. You can't do that. Listen, people have affairs and at the very least have complicated relationships with their spouses. The issue here is that Brad Stevens knew that this female staff member had a lot of leverage when it came to a civil lawsuit. I have to imagine that Brad Stevens knew he had to address this quickly and publicly. Because if you know anything about the Watergate scandal, you know that the crime is not as bad as the cover-up. So Stevens knew he had to suspend the coach that he just hired and had got him to the finals only months before. Keep in mind, he suspended him. He didn't want to fire him, but he knew he had to have a huge gesture to show that the Boston Celtics took this seriously, and they didn't want to end up in civil court. So in the meantime, Joe Mazzulla ends up being hired as head coach of the Boston Celtics, and Ime gets hired from the Houston Rockets. You may think, whoa, well I guess the Rockets have a lower standard of behavior for their head coach. They don't care if Ime's grabbing everyone's butt in the practice facility. Well, no, because keep in mind, if Mazzulla didn't have that much success, Ime would be the coach of the Boston Celtics right now. And the Rockets did do their own investigation to make sure they weren't hiring no perverts. So of all the disgraced coaches and players we're going to talk about today, this one is the most forgivable. If anything, it kind of worked out for both organizations. The Celtics ducked a lawsuit and still have a pretty solid head coach. If you think you're cute taking digs at Joe Mazzulla, you're not. Joe Mazzulla rules. And the Rockets have a head coach whose last game was the NBA Finals. And hopefully he's learned a lesson not to where he eats. So in no way do I look down on the Rockets for hiring Ime. I would have given him a second chance too. I have to say the Houston Rockets handled another incident really well when Kevin Porter Jr. was arrested for domestic violence charges. On September 11th, 2023, Kevin Porter Jr. was arrested for allegedly attacking his girlfriend. His girlfriend had a laceration on her eye and a vertebrae rupture from apparent strangling. All of this is subject to due process, but it doesn't look good for KPJ. So the Rockets suspended him from being involved with their team in any way. They are letting the police and the league take it from here. Smart move. The Rockets could have let KPJ play with them in the preseason, come to the practice facility. He's innocent until he's proven guilty. But they aren't stupid, and KPJ has had a reputation of being a reckless person for his entire career. Look it up if you don't believe me. The Rockets signed KPJ to an $82 million 4-year deal last summer. He was a big part of their plans. I do not see that being the case anymore. Personally, if I was an owner or a GM and one of my players was even allegedly arrested for brutally beating a woman, I wouldn't let them in my facility. I think that would be the end of our professional relationship. Because at the very least, I think it would bring on bad vibes. Now, let's talk about Miles Bridges. In June 2022, Miles Bridges' wife shared photos of herself where she'd clearly been beaten. She said that her husband, Miles, had physically assaulted her in front of her children. If you look at the details of the assault, again, they are absolutely brutal. On November 3rd, 2022, Miles Bridges eventually pled no contest to domestic violence charges. No contest just means you didn't plead not guilty, but you also didn't plead guilty. You just didn't want to admit to what you did. Bridges technically wasn't under contract last year, but he was suspended for 30 games. This offseason, the Charlotte Hornets gave Miles Bridges a qualifying offer because he was still under that rookie contract law. That means any other team could have offered Miles Bridges a deal and the Charlotte Hornets could have matched it. But of course, no teams gave Miles Bridges another offer. Maybe because they saw the pictures of Miles Bridges' wife and thought maybe this guy is capable of generating bad vibes in the org. The Hornets didn't seem to care. Miles Bridges is a Hornet again. But is he really? quickly, because Bridges was just issued a warrant for his arrest because he broke a restraining order. He went to the residence of his wife and broke her windshield. And I have no sympathy for the Hornets, because you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Ideally, if karma is real and the world always finds a way to balance itself out, the Charlotte Hornets will be the laughingstock of the NBA for years to come. The next player I want to talk about is Josh Primo. In October 2022, Josh Primo was waived by the San Antonio Spurs. This came as a big shock to San Antonio Spurs fans because he was drafted 12th overall only a year before. But the truth was, the Spurs were being sued by a team psychologist of theirs. She was saying that Primo exposed himself to her 9 different times in their therapy sessions. The psychologist said she reported this to the organization, but they completely ignored it. There were multiple women in the organization and outside of the organization that corroborated her story, saying that Primo had exposed himself to them as well. Primo didn't play last year. Now he has signed a new contract. It's a 2-way contract with the LA Clippers, who have given him a mental health evaluation and believe he is ready for a second chance. For me, what separates this case from Kevin Porter Jr. and Miles Bridges is that it's a non-violent crime. While it is a sex crime, which can be very damaging to the victim's psyche, I don't believe it deserves a zero tolerance policy. I don't feel any moral convictions about going and supporting a team that signed Primo. I'll definitely be at a couple Clippers games this year, but if this weird habit of his continues, I have to imagine his time in the NBA will come to an end very soon. But I pray he gets the help that he needs. My main point of this video is I believe that the NBA should have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to domestic violence. I think it's strange that Tyreke Evans was suspended from the league for 2 years after violating the drug policy. He was not charged with anything criminal. It was simply a violation and it didn't directly affect any other person in any way, unlike the cases that I previously mentioned. Another aspect of the Tyreke Evans case is that it was not a performance enhancing drug. It wasn't like they were trying to protect the sanctity of the game. He received an extremely harsh punishment for doing a recreational drug. I think the NBA just needs to rethink its policy on how it punishes players and coaches. I do believe there is a road to redemption for everyone, but I believe that anything as severe as domestic violence or sexual assault has no place in professional sports / entertainment. As much as I like Jason Kidd's personality, I think there is something definitely wrong with him being a leader of a team, being that he has a domestic violence conviction and multiple allegations. But I also understand the fact that people can change, and there has to be a way for these people to find their way back to the game they love. And I don't bring this up about Kidd to just rehash old drama for clicks. I bring it up because it can be forgiven, but to forget what happened is only going to lead to more of this type of behavior in the future. All that to say, any organization that has a zero tolerance policy toward any type of violence, I always have a proclivity for. While professional athletes are by all definitions VIPs, but to hold them to different standards for the way they treat people is just wrong. Alright, thank you for being here. Thanks for watching. If I missed something, if you thought something else was important that you find particularly interesting or something that needs to be said, definitely leave a comment. I always reply. So be good to your mothers, eat your corn dogs,